Namaskar, welcome to Candid Conversation. I'm Mark Lynn, and today our guest is Mr. Ajay Mathur, the Director General of the Energy and Resources Institute, also member of the Prime Minister's panel on climate change and one of the key negotiators of the Paris climate deal, apart from being India's spokesperson at Paris when that Paris Pact was negotiated and agreed upon. India, of course, ratified the agreement on the 2nd of October, and today with the European Union ratifying it, it has now met the minimum criteria of 55 countries and 55% of the carbon emissions for this agreement to come into effect. But we'll talk to him about that. Firstly, sir, thank you very much for being with us. When does this agreement come into effect now that it's met the minimum criteria?
The agreement will come into force 30 days after the threshold that you had mentioned, 55 countries accounting for 55% of the global emissions is met. So it will be the 5th of November that the Paris Agreement will come into force.
Right, and on the 7th of November, the next round of climate negotiations takes place in Marrakesh. What does that mean? And I mean, with the agreement in effect, what more needs to be done?
Well, this is one of the fastest ratifications, at least that I know of any major agreement. This has caught us all by surprise. And what this means is that when the Marrakesh meeting happens, the Paris Agreement is in force, and so the first meeting of the Paris parties could also be held at Marrakesh. Okay. Now, this is important because in the Paris Agreement, there were a number of things that it was said would be decided at the first meeting of the Paris parties. Now, in a sense, we are unprepared. We haven't got the background documents. Most countries haven't thought about it. So there's a scramble happening now about what is the agenda, what are the discussions, what do we seek to achieve at the Marrakesh meeting.
Even with the INDCs of all the countries put into place, it still comes to about 2.7%. 2.7 degrees is what's going to be achieved, not what the Paris Agreement mentioned as under 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees. So we need to do more than what the INDCs of all the countries have so far hoped to achieve.
When we met at Paris, we had all submitted our INDCs, and it was very clear that together they were inadequate to meet the 2-degree goal, far less the 1.5 degree goal that is an aspirational goal. Therefore, at Paris, we negotiated an agreement where we would all pledge. Okay. We would achieve our pledges, and all of us are good at achieving what we have promised, not necessarily what is thrust down on us, and then pledge more. So the Paris Agreement is about pledging, achieving, and then pledging more. Yes. And it is this periodic increase in ambition that will hopefully take us towards the 2-degree, towards a goal of limiting the global temperature increase to less than 2 degrees above the pre-industrial norm.
So this agreement will actually come into force only after 2020, and until then the Kyoto Protocol still operates, isn't it? But some of the big countries who are signatories of the Paris deal, like the US, for instance, have not even signed Kyoto, isn't it?
Well, Kyoto is an example now of what we should not do at the global level. Because at Kyoto, top-down goals were given to all the developed countries. And then as we achieved the date on which these had to be met, 2012, we found that countries who could not meet their goals stepped out. So the US is, of course, not part of it. Japan is not part of it, Australia is not part of it, Canada is not part of it. So Kyoto is currently a toothless tiger.
Okay.
Paris, you're absolutely right. The first requirements, particularly the reporting requirements, start in 2020. Mm-hmm. Now, the INDCs that we and most other countries have submitted look at goals that have to be achieved by 2030. So there's a huge amount of preparatory work that needs to be done.
Absolutely.
So irrespective of its coming into force, whether in November 2016, as has now happened, or whether it was 2017 or 2018, that preparatory work has to start so that the reporting that has to be done from 2020 onwards can be achieved.
One of the aspects of the Paris deal is climate justice, and India played a significant role in trying to get that climate justice clause put into the agreement. Here too, I mean, are we seeing that, that $100 billion fund, is it actually being, is there so much money as yet? Is it going to be achieved? Is it going to fulfill its purpose? These are the kind of questions that people are asking.
The global fund, which is called the Green Climate Fund, or the GCF,
yes,
today has commitments, I think, of about $10 billion, of which about half they have received. Unfortunately, their disbursements have been very slow. Unfortunately, we, the developing countries, have been relatively slow in putting up projects for funding. I see that changing now. With the Paris Agreement coming into force, countries will suddenly become a lot more serious about actions that would help them meet the pledges that they had made. We will therefore see both an increased interest and therefore an increased commitments of the monies that they already have in hand. I think very, very soon, possibly even before the end of next year, the GCF will have to go in for a second round of pledging, to get more funds. But very clearly, the 10 billion they have is just the starter.
It's just the start, and apart from that, there is a problem of technology transfer because of IPR issues. Is that an area of concern for the future in terms of technology transfer? What is actually the element of cost in IPRs involved in transferring green technology?
When a new technology is developed, and as we look towards implementing our INDCs, it's really through the application of newer technologies which are less carbon intensive. Typically, these are more costly than conventional technologies, and typically when they're first developed, the costs are higher. Now, as economies of scale occur, as markets grow, the costs decline. So what India has done is that we have gotten into acquiring the technologies once, in a sense, the patent period has expired. So we're able to get it a lot more cheaply. If India is to acquire these technologies early on in the game, then they are more expensive. And that is the kind of wedge which we think the Green Climate Fund would need to finance.
If we look at our INDCs now, one of the main thrust areas is on efficiency. We have to improve our industrial efficiency. I think the target is what, to 33%, 35%. What actually is required for this to happen? I mean, are we seeing, if we continue in the same mode that we have been, let's say from the year 2000 onwards, are we likely to achieve this?
Our goal is that the carbon intensity of our economy, which is essentially the amount of carbon dioxide we emit divided by our GDP, that value in 2030 would be 33 to 35% less than what it was in 2005. Okay. Now, the way we are going, we will be somewhere around 25, 26, 27, maybe 30%. Going to 35% will take an additional jolt. Where will this jolt come from? In my view, the industry sector is where this difference will be made. A very large part of the industry that this country will have has yet to be established. I mean, look around us. As more buildings will be built, we will need more cement plants, more steel plants. As these buildings require more air conditioning companies will come up. What we need to do is that each one of them is more efficient than the one installed yesterday. Okay. That's the only way that we can ensure that we can meet this goal. And this trend will have to be accelerated. The Bureau of Energy Efficiency had launched a program called Perform, Achieve and Trade, under which they had provided specific targets to the most energy intensive industries in India to improve the amount of energy they need to produce a ton of cement or a ton of steel or to make a unit of electricity.
Okay.
The first phase was immensely successful. The goal was that we would reduce the amount of energy that they use by about 6.5 million tons of oil equivalent every year. What has been achieved is over 8. And for the second phase, a lot more stringent, a lot more ambitious targets have been mandated on not only those industries, but into new sectors which are now covered by PAT. I think this progressively more stringent targets under PAT and similar programs will be essential if we have to meet the INDC target.
Do you look at this as an opportunity, because obviously rapid urbanization is taking place, the government is talking about 100 smart cities, all these obviously are going to be very energy efficient cities, and our whole focus is now changing towards energy efficiency. So, I mean, for companies who are coming into the business, do you see this, I mean, as a big opportunity?
This is a huge opportunity because at the end of the day, if I as a company am more energy efficient, I'm also more competitive. Energy costs are increasing over time. Also, the energy costs that the Indian industry pays are amongst the highest in the world. This is a big part, energy is a big part of their total costs.
Okay.
Now, if they bring in more efficient technologies, they're themselves more efficient, and their emissions are also lower. The question, of course, is why is it not happening anyway? And the challenge there is that for many of these products, they end up having a higher cost when you go to buy them in the market, like an LED bulb.
Absolutely.
But when you use it, you pay a much lower cost to the electricity company every month.
Okay.
So a higher capital cost, but lower operating costs. And therefore, what are needed are business models that help us get the higher capital cost in the beginning, so that we pay it through the savings that we do over time. This is the model that Energy Efficiency Services Limited is using on the LED bulbs, where it is sold to us.
Okay.
EESL procures it, and we pay 10 rupees a month through our electricity bill.
So can't the cost of production itself come down? Isn't it possible through, I mean, let's say if the other more energy non-efficient sources that we use, like, I mean, other bulbs, etc., are just put out of the market by law, then, I mean, would we say that there could be some force that could bring about competitiveness in this area, and, you know, because everyone would have be forced to produce only LED bulbs and bring things down?
Sure. I think the ESL example in LEDs is also a great example of how costs have come down. The first bulk procurement of LED bulbs that they did in January 2014, the cost that they paid was 310 rupees for a bulb. In the sixth procurement that they did about a month ago, the price had fallen to 35 rupees for a bulb. That's a huge decrease, largely brought about because of scale, because there was one tender after the other. Also because in these tenders, the volumes were all given not just to one manufacturer, but typically to 3 manufacturers in each tender. So an entire industry built up, it invested, and therefore costs came down. So yes, you're absolutely right. There is a huge opportunity for cost reductions when we use the scale of the market. That's the greatest asset.
We're going to take a short break. You're watching Candid Conversation with Mr. Ajay Mathur, the Director General of TERI. Stay with us.
प्रकाश सूर्या जीवन भर साथ का वादा दमदार मजबूती की मिसाल प्रकाश सूर्या GI पाइप्स चले सालों साल।
भाई बोले तो अपुन के एरिया में अपुन से बड़ा डेंजर कौन आ गया भाई? डेंगू और चिकुनगुनिया। बोले तो दोनों का गेम बजा देते भाई। अरे पापा कूलर में मच्छर की फैक्ट्री डाले ले क्या? ड्रम, कूलर, गमले, पक्षियों के बर्तन वगैरह को हर हफ्ते साफ करने का। टायर, प्लास्टिक के कप, ग्लास, नारियल के खोल में पानी जमा ना होने दे। डेंगू और चिकुनगुनिया का मच्छर साफ पानी में पनपता है। मच्छर के काटने से बचे, बुखार हो तो पैरासिटामोल लेने का, एस्प्रिन नहीं। पर भाई ये बीमारी का पता कैसे चलेगा? सीधा है रे, बदन दर्द, सर दर्द, तेज बुखार, थकावट, बदन पे दाने निकले तो मतलब डॉक्टर को मिलने का, खुद डॉक्टर नहीं बनने का, समझा? वाह भाई, आप तो सचमुच के एमबीबीएस हो भाई।
प्रिया दीदी नमस्ते, आप यहाँ राशन खरीदने आई हैं?
आइए, मैं जहाँ से लेती हूँ ना वहाँ चलिए, वहाँ सामान भी सस्ता मिलेगा।
मेरे लिए सुरक्षा, साफ सफाई और क्वालिटी सबसे ज्यादा जरूरी है। आपको ये देखना चाहिए कि जो चीजें आप खरीद रही हैं, उन्हें कैसे रखा गया है, उन पे धूल मिट्टी पड़ रही है, क्या उनकी सामग्री ताज़ा होती है, क्या इस्तेमाल किया गया पानी पीने लायक है। अपनों की सेहत का ख्याल रखने के लिए हमें सुरक्षा, स्वच्छता और क्वालिटी पर जोर देना चाहिए।
रोशनी का सिर्फ एक ही नाम, सूर्य एलईडी। खर्चा कम, चले ज्यादा, घर घर रोशनी का वादा।
बच्चों, जवाब ठीक से देना और सफाई के 10 नंबर होंगे।
चौंकिए मत, डेंगू और चिकुनगुनिया से बचने के लिए ये जरूरी है। आसपास पानी जमा ना होने दें। ड्रम, कूलर, गमले को हर सप्ताह साफ करें। प्लास्टिक के कप व नारियल की खोल इधर उधर न फेंके, क्योंकि डेंगू और चिकुनगुनिया का मच्छर साफ पानी में पनपता है। मच्छरों के काटने से बचें। बुखार में पैरासिटामोल लें, एस्पिरिन हरगिज न लें।
इस बार तो बच्चों ने हमें ही पास कर दिया।
और सफाई के नंबर 100 में से 100।
हाँ।
Welcome back. Well, Mr. Mathur, before the break we were talking about how costs can be reduced as far as producing energy efficient technology is concerned. What about the energy itself? Now, one of the INDCs is that we are going to be producing a lot more renewable energy. Now, that has a problem with grid parity, isn't it?
Sure.
So, I mean, how do we bring that down?
Again, on the solar PV side, we have had relatively good success. The global market for PVs has increased, and the price of electricity from solar PV in India over the last 5 years has dropped from 18 rupees a unit to about 4 rupees 32 paisa a unit. But even at 4 rupees 32 paisa, it's double the cost of coal-based electricity.
Sure.
This is a challenge, because for you and I and for the many millions who have just got access to electricity, this is a very high price. And therefore, the challenge becomes, how do we meet it? So, this has therefore two parts. The first is that we keep on increasing the scale, prices keep coming down till at least the price of electricity from the solar panel is roughly equal to that from a coal-based power plant. This is one part. But the other part is that as the amount of solar electricity and wind electricity in the grid keeps increasing, then we are faced with the situation, what happens when the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing? You and I still need electricity.
True.
And that is why it is very important that the grid invests in technologies for generating electricity that can come up very soon as the wind stops blowing, and then can go down very soon once the wind again starts blowing.
Okay.
So this includes pumped storage, this includes gas electricity that can come up and down fast. It may include batteries in the future. We therefore need to start investing in these storage technologies if we have to meet that goal of 40% of our electricity generating capacity being based on non-fossil fuels.
And of that 100 gigawatts is going to be solar. And a part of that, I mean, a large portion of that is supposed to be rooftop solar. I mean, what kind of adjustments should people be making for rooftop solar, and how, I mean, how does one sell it and make it catch on?
As far as rooftop solar is concerned, on most roofs, we already are on the roofs of houses where we already have electricity. So when the sun stops shining, you buy electricity from the grid. However, remember that now, during the day you're using your solar energy, and the electricity plant is therefore producing electricity only for the 5, 6, 7, 8 hours of darkness. That electricity is going to be expensive. This will have to be factored in the calculations that we make of the future. Right. The only way that this can be managed is that at the same time we also invest in the kind of storage technologies that I was talking about, the pumped storage, the gas technologies, and the battery technologies. Only when those become cost effective will we be at a stage where, whether it is rooftop solar or it is grid connected solar, we would be able to have electricity which is both autonomous, I have control over it, as well as cost effective.
Another aspect, of course, is the absorption of excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We need carbon sinks, and a lot of investment into afforestation is planned. How important is this, and where are we and where do we need to go?
The Indian forests currently absorb about 1.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide. And we have said we will increase it to 2.5 to 3 billion tons. That means we are almost doubling it. We are also a very populous country. Absolutely. And consequently the availability of land is relatively limited. It's going to be difficult to find new land that could be called as forest land. In fact, all the pressure is on the other side for forest land to be called non-forest land. The challenge, therefore, is we have to increase the density of trees on forest land. So wherever trees exist, increasing the number of trees per square meter is the only way to go. You see one tree, well, in a few years there should be 2 trees, so that by 2030 they're fully grown, and now that same area is absorbing twice the amount of carbon dioxide than it is absorbing today. That's essentially the way we have to go. It also means that the trees that we plant, a far greater percentage of them have to survive. Today, in forestry plantations, the survival rate is abysmally low. That has to increase. That means that we need to make sure that they are watered at the right time, that they are not grazed by animals. The entire management of new plantations will have to increase by an order of magnitude if we have to ensure that there are 2 trees everywhere in 2030 where there is only 1 today.
Another aspect, of course, is on roads, where we have a lot of emissions through our cars, and people now talk about the possibility of carbon neutral fuels. Is that a possible? There's some talk about methanol economy. Where are we going as far as these things are concerned? Are you aware?
Sure. As far as biofuels are concerned, we went through the first stage, which was using biofuels from jatropha and so on. That didn't work out because, again, the amount of land that we have is limited, and therefore I would rather grow rice and wheat, which has got a far greater profitability, than grow jatropha. So it became a kind of a fight. Do I want to grow fuel for people, or do I want to grow fuel for cars? Now, the second generation of biofuels is really using agricultural wastes. So when you have wheat straw or parts from trees, can they be converted into biofuel? So that's where the vast amount of research today is going. The third is to look at fuels like dimethyl ether or the other chemicals that you can get again from biomass. Right. So that would be the next generation of fuels. Again, there's a lot of research going on, including at my institute TERI, sure, where we are seeing how we can convert biomass into these third generation fuels.
Okay, and let's look at the Paris Pact in its totality for the whole world. If this pact didn't exist, were we on the road to serious destruction?
Undoubtedly. If countries did not reduce their emissions, we would have been on a path where the global temperature would have been 4 degrees above pre-industrial times. All that the countries have promised to do till 2030, the INDCs, does not bring it to 2 degrees, but brings it to 2.7. Closer to 2 than it was earlier. Of course, as I said, we need to make sure that our pledges become more ambitious so that we can reach the 2-degree goal.
Right, and of course, I mean, the pledges are going to be increased over time. And is there a process, I mean, when we reach a critical level where we can actually work in the reverse and, you know, get back to a position where, let's say, I mean, there are no increases at all?
Well, the Paris Agreement does talk that by the end of the century, by 2100, we move to a zero emission economy. That's an aspirational goal, but it sets the direction. Several countries have also started talking about negative emissions, because it's only when some countries have negative emissions and some countries have positive emissions that globally we will be at zero emissions. This is somewhat in the future, but I think it's an aspiration. It's a good goal to have.
One final question. India, first of all, submitted its INDCs on the 2nd of October, and it also signed ratified the agreement again the next year, that's this year, on October 2nd, that's Gandhi Jayanti. The significance of this, and also about the message of, let's say, the change in our lifestyles that people need to make to, you know, to simply make our living more environment friendly.
You know, listen, if you take a bucket of water, and if the bucket has a hole in it, no matter how much water you fill in, that bucket will go empty. Very similarly, if we have a lifestyle which is based on, say, a huge amount of energy or a huge amount of water, no matter how much energy we are able to dig out of the earth, it will never be enough. There is a balance. There is a trade-off between what we need to have a reasonable lifestyle and what is it that the earth can actually manage over the long term. That is the golden mean we want to move towards.
And those are the words of Mahatma Gandhi as well. Mr. Ajay Mathur, thank you very much for talking to us here on DD News.
Thank you. Such a pleasure.